Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As one of CEL's coordinator, I'm delighted to welcome you to the January Transition Days conference. What a pleasure it is to see so many icons, and I think there is a lot of people still coming in. Or it is nice, at least until we can meet face to face. Thank you all for dedicating your Saturday to our guest, who is spending part of her night with us today. Night. If there is one benefit to this global pandemic, I think it is that we are able to invite Vandana Shiva to this conference live from India. Because today there is also unknown faces, I will take a few seconds to briefly introduce CEL, the Transition Hub. The transition movement in Luxembourg has 10 regional and thematic groups in which a lot of citizens are active in. For salaried projects such as Reconomy, Earthshift, urban gardening, and so on. You will find all the information on our website, which is not functioning now, but in a few weeks, months, who knows, you will find all the information. Talking about transition implies above all that we have taken note of the fact that our society will undergo major disruptions in the years to come, linked in particular to climate change, to the biodiversity crisis, the end of cheap energy, and the end of the economic growth that is a direct consequence of this. Through concrete and positive action, it is a question of demonstrating that everyone is capable of action, of being creative, of expressing skills. Citizens who set up their own currency, create their own vegetable garden, relocate the economy, build differently, found energy cooperatives, and so on. Once every 2 years, the movement proposes a festival, the Transition Days, which aims to make visible the alternatives on specific theme. This year, noting that Luxembourg had once again taken the lead in the ranking of the country with the highest carbon footprint in the world, we decided to address the question of how to live together in a one planet world. It's a big question, isn't it? To do so, we use the symbolism of the house and its various rooms. We have already passed through the kitchen, the sailor, the office in 2020, and are continuing our discovery in the bedroom. This month is an opportunity to settle down, to focus on ourselves, actors of change. So because I imagine that you didn't come to listen to me talking all afternoon, I leave you in the hands of the inspiring Vandana Shiva, scientist, winner of the Alternative Nobel Prize, and famous Indian eco-feminist, known in particular for her fight against GMOs. Dr. Vandana Shiva is a modern-day revolutionary, and for 40 years has been fighting an heroic battle on behalf of humanity and the ecologically endangered natural systems that support us. But she's opposed by powerful multinational corporations committed in continuing their toxic, thus lucrative agricultural practices. Today, we will not talk about her activism against multinationals, although that is really interesting and exciting, but about the resources she mobilized for action, the resources we need as activists to continue the action. We asked her the following question: how can I stay resilient and still be committed to a cause without burning myself out? It is with a great emotion that I introduce this remarkable person today. For those who knows me, I don't really have the profile of a fangirl. But if there is anyone I would dream of having a drink with, chatting with, and even receiving an inspiring sentences scribbled on the first page of a book, it is her. I hope she will give you the same energy and ability to imagine our world as she has given me since my first step in the world of ecology. I wish you a nice immersion in the resilient world that Professor Shiva offers us, and wait for you the following months in other rooms until June 11 for the Transition Days Festival, for which we will have already launched the milestones of the resilient, just, and responsible society we dream of. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you very much, Maureen. And it's a joy to join Transition Days with a theme that has been the guiding theme of my life, how to live in one world together. Because we are in one world, we've had an illusion that we are separate from the earth. We've had an illusion that we're separate from each other. And in fact, so much of the project of power over the last 500 years of colonialism and the last 30 years of neoliberal globalization has been a project to even dismember us and separate us from ourselves. My dear friend and colleague Maria Mies and I wrote a book called Eco-Feminism, in which she wrote a chapter from the individual to the individual, that first we were atomized and now we are being fragmented. And yes, I'm very happy that we can communicate in spite of the lockdown. But when I think of our young children, separate from each other, not on a playground, separate from community, not being able to walk down a street and know there are other people of different kinds, not be part of nature, and just sit in front of their computers. And now they're saying 6-year-olds should learn how to code. And they're not being told that coding is something artificial intelligence can do. And that is a sure way to get rid of you very, very fast. So we are in a beautiful world. And each of us is a beautiful person. So when I'm asked the question, how do you stay resilient while fighting for a cause without burning out? My first thought goes to the fact that fossil fuels burn out. When you plant a seed, as you do in your gardens, and it grows into a plant and gives you beans or squashes or tomatoes, and you save a bit of it as seed, and you plant it again, that cycle of life's abundance never burns out. There's no burnout in nature. There's burnout in the fossil fuel age, in the industrial age, and there is a burnout in war where you leave burnt landscapes. So I think the first step really is to wake up to our oneness with the earth. We are part of an earth family. We're part of one interconnected world. Now, I am fortunate that I did my doctoral studies very consciously. I did my MSc honors in particle physics, and I left a career that I would have had in atomic energy and nuclear physics, and decided to go deeper into what does quantum physics mean. And the three things that I learned from my scientific training are very useful lessons for us for resilience. You know, the first is non-separability. Everything is connected. So you are not separate from the world. You are part of the planet. The second is potential. You know, the industrial age, the fossil fuel age, created a certain kind of reductionist, mechanistic way of looking at the world. And this reductionist, mechanistic way of looking at the world created a separation. It created atomization, that everything is an inert particle, separate from each other. And it's immutable, it cannot change. But that's not true. As quantum theory tells us, everything is potential. Everything is potential, waiting to happen. You are potential. So if you remember you are not separate, then you don't go into a tizzy about how do you take care of yourself and take care of the earth, because they're two different tasks. No, they're one task, because we are interconnected. And it doesn't matter which end you begin with, you know. But eventually, if you do it right, taking care of the planet, taking care of your community, is taking care of yourself. Second, potential. You are not a fixed entity. You are bursting to be more beautiful, more happy, have happier well-being, have deeper community. And that potential only grows when you're conscious that you have it. If you adopt the Cartesian model that I am inferior, I am depressed, I am lonely, you will put yourself in that position. But if you tell yourself, I'm interconnected, and others are waiting for my relationship, and the more I relate, the more evolved my potential as a human being is, as a person is. And then the third issue related very much to this Cartesian worldview is the construction of a self who is isolated, who's an atom, and cannot establish relationship and can only be moved by force. The problem with the mechanistic world, with the Newtonian world, the Cartesian world, the Baconian world, is that the only way things can move is through force. But because everything is connected, in quantum theory and in ecology, you have action at a distance. As they say, a butterfly's wing can create a storm. That interconnectedness means that we are not separate from each other. We are not atoms. We are woven into the web of life and the web of community. We might not be conscious of it, but our lack of awareness doesn't make it disappear. Let me give you just two examples. You know, we are in a kind of CO2 obsession because of the fossil fuel age. Everyone's looking at CO2, 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 how much CO2 got emitted. Now, I've always looked at the other end of the cycle, the miracle of a tree, a green leaf of a plant that can take that CO2 and with the sunlight, through the process of photosynthesis, convert it into carbohydrates that becomes the food we eat, the fiber we wear, everything that the world needs comes from that initial energy of photosynthesis. But as a byproduct, the plants give us the gift of breath. Because they breathe, we breathe. But they breathe out oxygen. We breathe out carbon dioxide, and look at the miracle of mutuality, of mutual giving. The plant is not anxious that is giving out CO2, that's absorbing CO2. Now, a lot of this has to do with linear thought. Yeah, the mechanistic world is an output-input machine. It takes and extracts the earth's gifts, and then it puts out pollution. But nature doesn't work that way. Nature works in cycles, and it works in cycles of giving. It works in cycles of return. It works in cycles of reciprocity. I gave you the example of the tree and the leaf and photosynthesis. So just imagine that you are a leaf, you are a seed. Or imagine even further that you are this amazing fungi in the soil called the mycorrhizal fungi. Now, dead soils are just mineral. But living soils, which nature creates in forests by herself, she creates them in grasslands, but we can create them in farms by mimicking nature, by following nature's laws of the law of return. The synthetic fertilizers are not based on the law of return. They're based on the law of warfare. And I'll tell you a little more about that. But the soil is a rich microbiome. And let me share with you the amazing text of the person who came to India. He was sent in 1905 to India to improve Indian agriculture, because part of the colonial enterprise is to improve those who are colonized. You know, we constantly need improvement. But he was a good scientist, and he found the soils were fertile, and he found there were lots of insects, but no pest damage. And he said, this is good farming, and I will make the peasant my professor. And then he learned about the life in the soil. And he took this learning through a book called The Agricultural Testament. I would suggest that Transition Days makes this book popular in Luxembourg. It's called An Agricultural Testament by Albert Howard. And he writes in it, a soil teeming with healthy life in the shape of abundant microflora and microfauna will bear healthy plants. And these, when consumed by animals and man, will confer health on animals and man. But an infertile soil, that is one lacking sufficient microbial, fungus and other life, will pass on some form of deficiency on the plant, and such plants in turn will pass on disease and deficiencies to us. So health is a continuum and a disease is a continuum. But coming back to the mycorrhizal fungi, you can't see it with your eyes. In one little cubic inch, you have 8 miles of it. And what does it do? It goes where there's nutrition and picks it up and brings it to the plants that are lacking nutrition. It goes into the roots of the plants and it takes from the plants the sugars and the carbohydrates, and it gives to the plant what the plant is lacking. And now they've done so much research. They've put tracers and they've put all kinds of stuff. And they are now finding that the mycorrhizal fungi, which now people are realizing is it's more intelligent than the World Wide Web. That the real World Wide Web is underneath in the soil. And they did research and they deprived a set of trees of nutrition. And they gave some other trees, they allowed other trees to have nutrition. And the fungi took the nutrition from where it was in abundance to the trees that were lacking it. So every time you worry about how to take care of yourself while you take care of bigger causes, think of the little fungi in the soil. If they can do it, we can do it. Or think of the bee and the butterfly. The bee goes to a plant. And without the bee, most plants would be infertile. It takes the pollen from the plant, but it doesn't kill the plant. It leaves it with fertility. And the next generation of seed and food can be recreated. This is the relationship that allows us to recognize that taking care of larger causes and taking care of ourselves is the same process. And just remember, does the bee, which travels miles and miles and miles, ever say, I'm having a burnout? I mean, poor thing is having a burnout with neonicotinoids, which we must ban, which we really must ban. But as one Earth family, we have to take care of other beings who are related to us. But we also have to be aware that taking care of those other beings is taking care of themselves, us. Let me come back to the soil and the microorganisms. Now, soil, when we give back to the earth, what is organic farming? You have gardens. What do you do in your gardens? You give back organic matter, tiny bits, very little bit. And then the earth gives you abundance of food by allowing soil microorganisms to produce rich nutrition. And again, there's so much research that's showing that soil's rich in nutrition, and we do it at Navdanya, and I hope, please visit the website of Navdanya to see the courses we offer so that we can go deeper into these issues. We offer a long course in September, October called Return to Earth, which is based on the law of return. So we give the soil a little bit, or what she's given us. We don't invent it, we give it back with gratitude, with a thank you. And then she gives us food. But the richer the soil organisms, the richer the nutrition in the plant. The richer the diversity of crops and the nutrition in the plant, the richer we are. We have been made to believe we are little atoms, lonely little atoms floating in an alien, horrible world. No, we live in a beautiful world and we are totally interconnected to the extent that 90% of you is not you. I talked about the trees. Your breath is not yours. It was given by the plants. So why would you feel separate? And you are not you, because 90% of the cells in our body and the microbes in our body are not human. 90% are microbes. And in our gut, which scientists are now waking up, our ancient tradition said, you have to think with your gut. Now they're realizing that the gut is the second brain. And let me just share with you some amazing data. So in our gut, which is called the gut microbiome, there's 100 trillion microbes. Now, when you feed the earth and the soil, gives you good food, then you feed your gut. And when you give glyphosate and toxics and pesticides, then your gut is attacked as if there's war. And your gut microbiome is damaged. All disease of today is related to the gut microbiome. And the reason it's called the second brain, that it has its own nervous system. It's called the enteric nervous system with 50 to 100 million nerve cells. And they have sensors. And these sensors want different kinds of food. So we might have junk food on the shelves made from the same GMO soya. And now Mr. Gates, who's my favorite person after Microsoft, after Monsanto, because he's doing Monsanto's work now. Yesterday we find out he is the biggest landlord of the world. He's become the one who owns most land in America. And meantime, he's saying, dematerialize. The world is digital. Forget your land, forget your soil, forget your food. It's all digital. And he's taking away your seed and your food and your land. So he has 14 patents. The Silicon Valley is now investing in food and in artificial food. But if junk food and ultra-processed food and chemicals and pesticides damaged our gut, can you imagine what totally artificial food made in the lab, synthesized, what it will do to our gut? So the best way to begin taking care of yourselves and taking care of the world is realizing we are one. We are one. I take care of my gut, I will have to take care of the soil. I can't run away from that fact. It's an ecological law. And so you won't worry about how do I have self-care and earth care. Because self-care and earth care is the same process. Those of you who are very concerned about climate change, let me just share with you some figures. So in the lead up to the Copenhagen summit, which was killed, and the legally binding treaty was made into a voluntary agreement by the time Paris happened. But in the lead up to Copenhagen, I wrote this book called Soil Not Oil. Because I realized that the discussion on climate change was becoming very partial. We were only measuring emissions without seeing, where do the emissions really come from, and linking that to responsible action. But we were also not looking at solutions of the living earth kind, where we can be co-creators with the earth. And that's when I assessed that about 45% of the greenhouse gases come from an industrial globalized agriculture, which is also destroying our health. In fact, many of my writings I have shown that if we weren't growing so much GMO soya and invading the Amazon, or so much palm oil and invading the Indonesian forests, we wouldn't be having these new epidemics and pandemics, whether it's Corona or SARS or Ebola or Zika or, just keep in the last 30 years, 300 of them. And what is the last 30 years? It's, indigenous people have lived in forests forever, and they haven't had these diseases. But the last 30 years have been the years of globalization and limitless appetite. And that invasion has led to this new pandemics. Of course, added to the fact that we are also doing factory farming where the multiplication is higher. We're also doing genetic engineering. All that adds up. But industrial agriculture per se, just in its production, because production is fossil fuel based and chemical based, nitrogen fertilizers use 2 liters of diesel to produce 1 liter. to 1 kilogram of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. And then that emits a nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more deadly than carbon dioxide. We rarely talk about nitrous oxide, but it's the nitrous oxide which is what we can totally avoid through organic farming. The beans fix nitrogen for us without messing up the atmosphere and messing up the soil and messing up the oceans with dead zones. So 15% comes from production, but 15 to 18% comes from this invasion into forests. It's called land use change and deforestation. And then we take good food and mess it up as junk food. And then we package it with aluminium because instead of eating fresh, we got to make it last for 2 years on a shelf. And if you don't eat before the best before date, it's going to be totally lethal and toxic. So we get rid of fresh, we get rid of diverse, we get rid of local, we process, we transport, we package. And we've had retail, but the giant retail of the Walmarts and the supermarkets is an industry. And that adds up to another 15 to 20%. And because this long distance transport of global supply chains creates a lot of waste, we waste about 4%. You don't waste at local level. I mean, we are having a huge debate in my country. You might be seeing news of the farmers protesting, but they keep saying Indian food is wasted. Indian food cannot be wasted. I have a cow, I have soil, I put the straw back into the soil, it's fertilizer. What I don't eat, I feed to my cow. And we eat everything, the banana, we eat the stem, we eat the flower, we of course eat the fruit. Some parts of India, they even cook the outside. And, we've done so much work on the biodiversity and food heritage of India. This is something we love to share with all of you through our courses and our learning. And when the lockdown is removed, we hope physically some of you can come to us. So how you grow your food totally decides whether you'll have emissions and greenhouse gases and climate change. But exactly the same that's happening to the planet is happening inside you. What damages the health of the planet damages your health. And again, we come back to the fact that self-care and planet care are the same. Whether you're passionate about being healthy personally, or you're passionate about the planet's health as climate activists, you can't get out from the fact that you have to do the same thing. You've got to go into your garden. And to me, the garden is the place where solutions will come. That's why for the last 15, 20 years, ever since farmer suicides started, etc., I started a movement called Gardens of Hope. And my colleagues were just calling me. They're out in the field in Bengal. And they were saying, it's amazing. Everything was locked down. Food had been locked down. Supply chains had disrupted. And the Gardens of Hope has created more prosperity than ever before. And the women are intensifying their gardens, looking for more diversity of vegetables, talking to each other about what's nutritious, talking about what are the plants that give you immunity. And we have so many medicinal plants. So let me go through the concrete steps that I have lived through in my life to not have burnout and to stay active. And, it's 50 years actually of activism for me. It's 40 years of agricultural activism and food activism. But, the movement I started with was the Hug the Tree movement in the mountains in the early 70s. And that is a very important place to learn how you don't burn out. When I love the tree that I'm protecting, and I say, they can take my life, but they can't take the tree. How can you have burnout? I was just in Rajasthan, where 300 years ago, 373 women gave their lives to protect a sacred tree, which is sacred because without it, the desert would be a desert and they wouldn't have agriculture. It's called the sacred Khejri. 373. They said, you got to kill us before you kill the tree. So the love of that to which you're related, love, transcends. It's the antidote to burnout. Yeah. Second, the fossil fuel age and the fossil fuel paradigm has created a very strange concept of energy. You know, that energy exhausts, that energy is polluting, that energy dissipates, that energy creates entropy. You know, there's in physics, you burn and then there's waste. But in life and nature, this waste is not there. And interestingly, one of the top leading founders of the quantum philosophy and quantum theory and quantum physics is Schrödinger. And Schrödinger, of course, wrote so much, but there's a little book of his that has been a very important book for me. Besides those three principles, I didn't come to the third principle. Let me come back to it. It's very important for not having burnout. So the first principle, non-separation. Second principle, potential. I'm potential. I'm not an inert entity. Third, uncertainty. The world is uncertain. Don't panic if you're not certain about tomorrow. Flow with it. Yeah. So he wrote this amazing booklet on what is life. And as a physicist, he said the brilliance of life is it reverses entropy. It creates negative entropy. So remember, every time you feel it, I'm having a burnout, I'm getting exhausted, I've given too much, now I can't give any more. Remember, you are part of life and a living world. And in a living world, energy is generative. It's autopoietic. It comes from within you. It comes from within the seed that becomes the tree. So we are creative agents. And as creative agents, we generate energy. And how do we generate energy? Through relationship, through giving. Another thing I've learned, and this is a very personal learning, you know, by and large, you give and you get hurt because you don't receive in return. So expectation of getting back, of receiving back, can leave you hurt and can leave you burnout. And you know, I'm going to be near 70, and life's experiences teaches you so much. And I've learned, and this is also a teaching of an amazing book called the Gita, I have learned that creativity calls on you to give your best, to give your all to your passion, and then not expect anything. Don't calculate what will come out of it. And that's why you must give passionately and then be detached about the outcome. That combination of passion in giving and dispassionate expectation gives you a huge liberation. In fact, if you really read spiritual teachings, it's about this. It's about detachment. It's not about separation. Separation is the root of alienation and isolation. But interconnectedness with a transcendence of expectation while you give gives you amazing capacity. And I would summarize it in just a phrase. When you work from an isolated self, a selfish self, you work from ego, to your ego, separate from the rest. It's driving you for expecting something, you know. It might not be money power, it might not be political power. You are in the act of service, but it will still be a power of some kind. But you detach yourself from seeking power and give deeply. And then what happens is you become ecological. You, from being an egoistic being, become an ecological being. And an ecological being is always nourished. Yeah? You're not anxious about who will nourish you, but you do get nourished. I can say that through my lifetime. Yeah? I chucked up a job in 1982. and I've trusted the world, and I've given what I can. Another lesson for me, and I say this very often, people say, oh, but this is so big, and climate change is so big, and that's so big, and that inequality is so big, and racism is so big, and patriarchy is so horrible. Just remember, you're not Atlas carrying the world on your shoulder, that the earth is carrying you. So remember your capacity and your potential while remembering your smallness. Being small is not being insignificant. And being big doesn't mean you're significant. With bigness, you might trample on others. Another lesson I have learned is know your truth through lived experience. There's too much post-truth out there, too much of it, too much fake news, too much propaganda. Don't get overwhelmed by it. In your life, you have relationships. Through your transition activism, you have a truth. When you work with the soil, you know the soil, that you're part of the soil, that humus, the soil, creates you, the human being. And finally, while we are aware of our interconnectedness, we also have to consciously cultivate community. Because we are not in the kind of societies today as indigenous people were, where part of the social system was community. We have to cultivate community. We have to reclaim the commons. We have to rejuvenate and regenerate that which is getting degraded. It's such an exciting moment. Never get depressed, never feel lonely, never feel isolated. You're a wonderful being in a wonderful world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for reminding us the true definition of ecology, because I think that we are forgetting it a lot. So it's the relationship between the human, the living, yeah, between all the living things. So thank you for that. Thank you also for your 4 tips. For me, it was maybe the most powerful, or at least with the combination with the other, it was one of the most powerful. So the fact that yeah, push your as much as you can your activism, but to low down a bit the expectation. I think that's maybe, yeah, one as you said, one of the key. So we will start with the question of the group. We do have a lot of them. I think I will start with one of Rita. She asked you about I mean, in Luxembourg, we are less than 5% of the vegetables are consumed and produced here in Luxembourg. And at the same time, land is getting more and more expensive. So what can we do? What do you suggest? How to try and avoid the loss of land and therefore the loss of soil?
Yeah. So across the world, there have been many movements in defense of the soil. In fact, I've just finished a course on the living soil. And I remember I inaugurated in Italy an amazing movement of the environmental movement called Liberate the Soil. And it was liberation from 3 things. Liberated from chemicals, liberated from cementification, and liberated from real estate speculation. So I mentioned that the person who used to be the richest man 3 years ago, but is still the most powerful man in terms of influencing the world's situation, whether it be ecology or it be health or it be women's status or anything. If you look at Forbes, he has emerged as the biggest landlord. Now, why are the very people who are saying we don't want farming, there will be no farmers in farming, you know, the future farming is farming without farmers. Why are they buying up land? So we have to reclaim land as a commons. We have to reclaim land as a life support. And this means the new recovery of the commons movement in a different kind of way. We have to build up a whole new culture of saying hands off for speculative forces, hands off our land. You talked about only 5% vegetables in Luxembourg, and you might think that's because we are in a rich country. But I can tell you, in the 30 years of globalization, and I have spent so much of my time studying this, countries that were fully food sufficient are importing most of their food because that was the design. That was the design, to not let countries be self-reliant. From Kissinger's days, when he said food is a weapon, make countries dependent, to World Bank, WTO rules, all of it is make countries dependent. Mexico imports corn, the heart of the home of corn, imports corn because of NAFTA. My own country would be importing all our food, but we have fought very hard for food sovereignty. So how do you increase the 5%? Fighting for justice in the global food system, because the reason you import more is someone else is growing it more cheaply because someone else is getting more exploited. Yeah? So that's where the justice movements come in. If you even look at Spain, which is a big supplier of organic for Europe, everyone there is working in slave conditions, usually illegal migrants. And that's why taking responsibility for growing our food locally, regionally, globally, has become a survival imperative. It's become an ecological imperative. In Europe, Luxembourg is part of Europe, right? You're not exited.
Yes.
You're not exited like Brexit.
No.
So they have the farm to fork program, which is supposed to be a transition program. Monitor that it doesn't go the wrong way, and ensure that where they have made commitments, halving pesticide use, making sure there's more local circular economies. These are all commitments in this program. And finally, as I said in Paris, when it looked like the talks were wobbling, we planted a beautiful garden. And I said, even if the governments fail, we will continue. And out of that, the Paris government has created a law that requires that you have to have gardens on your terraces. You have to have gardens in your balconies. Yeah. And just like you make other laws, you can start making growing food the most respectable thing to do in a city. The options are limitless. But the two things we will have to address is industrial agriculture and the subsidies it gets. Half of Europe's taxes go to pay subsidies to the agribusiness giants. And the second is the global trade rules, which are only meant for agribusiness. Monsanto wrote the seed rules. Cargill wrote the agriculture rules. The junk food industry wrote the safety rules. And we must start writing the rules from the bottom up.
Thank you. Yeah, we know that as being human and as being disconnected to this relation to nature and so on, we are part of the problem. We are destroying the planet. So first, why should we care about the notion of we created ourselves, so it's just self-care and so on, but also what do you think about do you believe in collapsology, and what should be the what should we as humans do? Yeah.
Well, if I was to believe in collapsology, I have to believe in irresponsibility and greed as an immutable force of humanity. And just like I said, we have a potential. Greed has been unleashed as a potential through the rules of trade. I would call them rules of greed. And that's why the billionaires have gone so rich. And I've just written a book called Oneness versus the 1%. And it's available in French. It's been published in France. It's my most recent book to understand what's happening in the world. It was triggered by the Paris climate summit, because strange things were happening in Paris. we have an option. I'll show you a book and you can download this. We have a choice. Here's a report I did 2 years ago. The future of our daily bread, regeneration or collapse. So collapsology means I believe in this. I say, no, this is a path that could happen if we don't put our energies in making a change, but we have the option of doing this. And that means if we do this, this doesn't happen. Regeneration is not only possible, it is our ecological ethical duty to participate in. It is the law of how nature works. Nature regenerates. We've got to do agriculture like nature. We've got to live like nature. We've got to regenerate ourselves all the time. So collapsology basically means we will not bring change. And another thing I would say to you is a lesson I've learned, both through my own study of history, but my living, is living systems regenerate. Powerful systems look all powerful in a short period. In Hitler's Germany, people living in that point would have said, oh my God, this will never end. This man's all powerful. And then he commits suicide and he's disappeared. And everything he did, the world now tries to avoid. The Nuremberg trials were held. The Human Rights Convention came out of it. So all abusive power, all violent power must end because it's not in alignment with nature's laws and it therefore doesn't regenerate. So no matter how horrible things look, just remember it'll pass. It has to pass. It's in the law of nature that it will pass.
You spoke about sementification. What does that mean exactly?
What?
Sementification.
Oh, cementification means drowning the soil under cement. It could be, you see, there's nothing natural about ever expanding cities. You create a disincentive through your subsidies for small farmers to survive. They're driven off the land, they're driven into the cities. You build more and more buildings, but you're one of the biggest paying things in my country where we have lots of people and very little land. And we love our soil. You know, we just absolutely treat her as Mother Earth. Every second day, I see a new highway. Every time I travel, there's another highway for a 2-mile shortcut, you know, for saving 5 minutes. And more highways are drowning the soil under cement. It's happening also in Europe. You know, the highway industry is a very profitable industry, and they're robbing us of our soil. That's cementification.
For now, all around the world, there is resistance. I would like to address you 2 questions. One is about the resistance in India and how are you connected to the farmer around Delhi who are fighting now, and where from those where do they find their strength for this long resistance?
Okay, so my work, I mentioned my background is quantum theory. I started to look at agriculture in 1984 because similar protests were happening in the Punjab where the Green Revolution had first been introduced. And that same year, a pesticide plant owned by Union Carbide leaked in the city of Bhopal and killed thousands of people. And children are still being born maimed today, 36 years later. Bhopal in Punjab made me walk the journey of both understanding why agriculture was so violent. 30,000 people were killed in Punjab, 30,000 people were killed in Bhopal. We're talking about very, very large scale genocide. And I also then made a commitment, I'm going to walk the path of a non-violent farming, which is why I have absolutely dedicated my life to show that there is another way. There's no inevitability to this violence. So 84, I did those studies. I wrote a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution. I then, the Monsanto said they'll own the seed. I started to save seeds. I started to look at globalization. And many of the old farmers have been with me in the 90s as we fought against. We said food and agriculture is too precious to be part of free trade agreements. The sons of some of the people, Tiket, I've worked with Tiket. We held rallies of 200,000 at Red Fort, 500,000 in Bangalore. And there's a film of that time called Seed Wars. You might want to see it. We just put it up again. I saw old versions of it. It's very, very, very old, but it's good history. The sons are today on the streets. When you ask what is their resilience, every person that I have heard talks about their resilience comes from the earth. Their resilience comes from the soil. And I want to share with you, as you'll notice, the most resilient are the people from Punjab. Punjab is where the Green Revolution was introduced. So they have suffered this the longest. Their land is destroyed. They have a cancer train that leaves Punjab. The train is full of cancer patients because of pesticides. Their rivers are dead. So they know the cost. And they fought for justice in 84 and they were killed. So they know that if they don't fight now, there's no hope ever. It's the end. They say we are fighting for our survival. And they are followers of Guru Nanak, the Sikh Guru, who transcended the narrow religions and priesthoods of Hinduism and Islam. And this is what they say. This is what they sing while, the two beautiful parts of these protests is, they sing their sacred songs. And they have, one of the things the Sikh Guru did was, he says, food is to be shared. And that's why they have this culture called the langar. If any of you know of a Gurdwara, they give food and they're holding langars. They have this community feeding programs and then they sing. And what do they sing? The air is my teacher. The water is my father. And the soil is my great mother. That is where the resilience comes from.
Thank you. And the second battle, well known around the world, is also the youth, Friday for Future, for example. So what can we address to this generation who will live with our mistakes or the consequences of how we live?
Okay, so 3 quick things on that. I'm actually doing a series of courses this year on Earth democracy and how the rights of nature are related to the rights of future generations. Yeah, but I'm working it through the scientific part and then the practical solutions. And in the middle of February, I've just finished soil. In the middle of February, I'll be doing on seed 3 days, 15, 16, 17, I think. And then I'll be doing on water in early March. And I'll be doing soil, not oil in April. So if you go to the website of Navdanya and go to the Earth University courses, if I was smart of doing cut and paste while I'm speaking, I'd have put it up on chat box. But
It's
my
done.
apology. I will mail this stuff to you. I will mail this to you so you can follow up with those who are participating and they can follow up. So the first is we actually right now are focusing all our energies on the youth leadership. When I met Greta, I told her, I said, Greta, strike on Fridays, it's brilliant. But the rest of the days, do positive action for Mother Earth. Do the garden. Let every school strike, have the rest of the week gardens. Fridays for the future is Friday strikes. The rest of the days for the earth. Now, if a global campaign could be started, that every school will have an edible schoolyard and the garden will be a classroom. Can you imagine the energies that this will unleash of changing not just the climate discourse, the food discourse, and this kind of an age apartheid that's grown in the West, you know? It breaks my heart because we respect our elders in India, you know? And I am so grateful for everything I received from my parents. Yeah. But that link was broken by the industrial West, that atomization. And if you think of it, how many people died of COVID in care homes? Why should old people be in care homes? They should be in homes, cared for. And worse, they're giving priority to old people for the vaccines. And 23 people have died in Norway with the vaccine in old people's homes. So I think we need a reconnection. We need a reconnection of humans with the earth, humans with each other, but humans of each generation with each other, and humans of different cultures with each other. And when we cross these bridges, then Fridays for the Future will be the force of the future.
What do you think about the idea of slowing down in the face of an ever-increasing piece of life? So an idea which has been put forward a lot by the degrowth movement and so on. What kind of support do you propose to accompany the degrowth?
Yeah, so two things for the slowing down. I've been vice president of Slow Food Movement for many, many years. And I've in fact just finished a manuscript for an Indian publisher on slowing down. Yeah. And it's about every aspect of slowing down so that we have deep democracy, slowing down the economy. So this idea of growth, of limitless growth, the insanity of it is abusive at every level. It was created fertilizers were created during the war. GDP was created during the war because the arms industry wanted to pull out more money for the military industrial complex. So the GDP was created to take out of society what society circulates within society. And that extraction became growth. And GDP became the measure. But if it was for an emergency, it should have been put aside after the wars. But it was profit-making, therefore it was not put aside. So alternatives have grown and they've flourished. In my books, so many of my books, I have addressed how it's a patriarchal concept because it totally ignores the amazing work of nature, the amazing work of women. And I work with the government of Bhutan, which said GDP measures nothing. We are going to measure gross national happiness because happiness and well-being is what counts. And definitely we need to slow down and count the real well-being in society. So growth is a biological word. Development is a biological word. They've been appropriated by an economics of greed and their meaning has been distorted. We've got to reclaim it. Our children must grow. Our communities must grow. Our gardens must grow. Of course we want growth, but we want growth of living systems and we want degrowth of killing systems. And that's why in Earth Democracy, one of my other books, and these courses I'm offering this year, I talk about killing economies and living economies, dead democracies and living democracies, and killing cultures of hate and living cultures of oneness.
So I'm smiling all through during your talk. So yeah, I said I'm kind of a fun girl, but yeah. Besides that, I think that I receive a lot of energy from you, and I'm asking myself, where do you get all your energy and positivity, all this power that I'm feeling in? What are your main motivators? How can you balance all of this in your life?
So if I was a device, yeah, I would not need to charge it like this, right? I would need an electric source. I need a wire. Mine is breaking. And I'd have to charge myself. But we are not devices. We are not mechanistic devices that need an external input of energy. We are part of a complex living system. And we are part of the logic of that living system. How do living systems work as different from machines? Machines are put together from outside. When they run out of fuel, they have to get fuel from outside. When they run out of charge, they've got to get their batteries charged from outside. Living systems are what we call autopoietic systems, self-organized. They grow from within. And within them is the capacity to constantly renew their growth, because the growth itself is generating energy, and that's the big difference. Just like there's fossil carbon, which is dead carbon, which is stay under the soil. But there's living carbon, which is what the plant and photosynthesis gives us, which is the carbohydrates, which is the food, which is the organic matter in the soil. So I don't agree with Bill Gates' language of decarbonize the world. If we decarbonize the world, we'll be very dead, because living carbon is life. Dead carbons kills life. In a similar way, there's energy. There's fossil energy and the mechanistic energy transformed into electrical energy. And even if you do the source of that external energy through renewables, through solar, as long as that model of external input is there, you will always run out of resources. You will always run out of systems that regenerate energy. We are autopoietic systems, and therefore we are self-generative in energy. Yeah. You do the right thing, the energy flows into you. You give, but you receive in amazing amounts. The energy flows. I do so much work with communities. I do it with love. I do it in a spirit of service. But the amount I receive from them, I cannot even start calculating. All my life has been dedicated to service of the earth, and I cannot even begin to count how much energy the earth gives me.
Thank you. In Europe and in Luxembourg, all this permaculture, gardening, bio eating, healthy eating, and so on is quite elitist. How can we reorientate that? How can we change the system in order that it will be more accessible, or everyone could get access to it?
Yeah. So the way we do it is, as I said, you have to fight the injustice of the system and the untruth of the system that makes food that is produced at very high cost financially, which is why small farmers are being driven off the land, high cost ecologically, which is why you get climate change, you get species extinction, etc., and high cost to society in terms of health. This high cost system magically produces cheap food. Yeah. And as a scientist, I apply my mind. If it's high cost, then the food should be high cost. Where does this magic happen? Yeah. High cost becomes cheap. Three things make it cheap. Subsidies. I mentioned half of your money in Europe, your tax money, is going to distort the system. So fight that you have a right to decide that your tax money goes to regenerate agriculture so that organic, fresh, local becomes affordable for all. The second is bigness of agribusiness, bigness of supermarkets. They create what is called a monopsony, a monopoly in buying. They drive down the prices. And so a farmer receives 1% of what the consumer pays. And the third is more and more vertical integration and more distancing. And that's unjust system and untruthful system, which I have both mentally and intellectually and scientifically fought against, but also through my activism, that system is so full of untruths. It's made that which comes easily from nature unaffordable, and that which comes with lots of twisted things totally affordable. We've got to fight against the violence against the poor of being fed junk food to public feeding programs. There too, it's our subsidies. But those subsidies could get a local organic farmer to supply an unemployed family. And this is where Brazil had actually done amazing work in Lula's time on zero hunger. We have to reactivate those systems. We have to learn once again. I'm not saying end the subsidies. I'm saying change them to protect nature, to make sure the farmers don't go under, and make sure the last person gets good food. In England, the Brexit, you know what they've done? they finished off fresh meals for children. And now families are being paid money and they're buying junk food because only junk food is affordable. In America, I have seen the richest land of the world has what is called food deserts. The first time I heard this word. And the food deserts are where the poor go to the 7-Eleven, stores, or they go to liquor stores and buy pet food to eat, or chips to eat, or Coca-Cola to eat. And this subsidy, this lie, I would just call it, we will not be able to make good food accessible to all if we don't address the lie that industrial food is cheap. And we don't address the lie that industrial food produces more. Both these, my work over these 36 years has shown ecological food produces more nutrition per acre and health per acre, and we have a whole report on that. And if the subsidies and monopolies did not distort the price, the local biodiverse organic would be the most affordable thing. And if that's where our public money supports it, and that's where your work on the farm to fork must be directed. And I think another thing that you have to do in Europe is prevent the big agribusiness from constantly pitting against each other the environmentalists and those who want to work for an equitable food system. Yeah, they always pit the two together. And I did a response to someone who's saying we got to get out. We as human beings must get out of the web of life. You know, how can you take care of a web of life if you're outside it? And they're justifying, a lot of it, shallow environmentalists are justifying fake food made from labs and Bill Gates, etc. And they even talk the word rewilding. Now I say my gut is healthy and there are 100 trillion microbes. My gut is a wild gut. If my mind is free and I am not invaded by propaganda, my mind is a wild mind. If my community has everything it needs and they're part of nature, that is rewilding. Rewilding is not getting human beings out of nature, but getting nature into all of our economy. Because nature is in our economy, we can deny it, we can exploit it, but the idea of the ecological apartheid between nature and humans, we must overcome that. And it is, you know, I don't know how many of you have heard of this crazy reset of the World Economic Forum. Yeah, it's a crazy idea. Yeah, you won't own anything, they'll own everything. Everything will be digital. And, you know, it's a crazy idea. And food itself will be one diet. They don't, I think they go to say it'll be lab made. Those are the visions we must challenge and create the real solutions from the ground. And for that, it means our local action has to have global awareness. And that's the reason international solidarity has to be a very important part of every local activism.
To what extent do you believe that conditioning by industrial age schooling is contributing to the next generation being unprepared for the creation of responsible, equitable society? And even if I don't like this word, isn't it urgent to educate our children in democracy, participative learning, institution, and so on? And how can we do that? Yeah, and treat them as equal also.
Yeah, so I totally agree. Industrial learning for the industrial age has given this alienation and this separation, the idea that we are, because that's what it is. What is Bacon's book? You know, when Bacon is taught, or Newton is taught, or Descartes is taught, or Hobbes is taught, or Locke is taught, you know, that's what you learn. You learn separation and you learn atomization. So we definitely need, and I mentioned it in the beginning, that, you know, with the whole digital education, that shrinkage of the mind will be even more. So what do we need to do? The reason I started the Earth University at Navdanya, it's on a farm. You know, you learn from nature, you learn from farmers, you learn by doing. And it is education for Earth democracy. And education for Earth democracy is living democracy. That means it has to be participatory, not just participatory as a human community, but participatory with an Earth community. It has to learn how to create living economies through working with nature. And this is even more important because now, as I mentioned, we are in this 99% disposable idea that the Zuckerberg say this and the Microsoft say, we don't need 99%, just give them a little bit of money to survive or buy a smartphone to play games. They actually say this. No, the 99% has to say, no, we will co-create with the Earth, we will co-create living economies. And the Earth University is one learning center, but we need learning centers everywhere. And I mentioned this already, we need edible schoolyards everywhere. The Fridays of the future must take a lead in this, but we also need young people knowing nature, taking a walk along the river, going into the forest, going into the meadow. I just gave an award today to a young man from Mumbai. It's a city. He's a naturalist in the city. And when I'm giving the award, I asked him, I said, how in the city? He says, if you just have to look, but nature is everywhere, you know. And for me, one of my most beautiful images is the fact that now that Europe has realized spraying Roundup is bad, and they're leaving the pavements, all kinds of plants and flowers are bursting out of the pavement. That's how we have to be. That is resilience. You know, if they're cementifying us, we've got to be the plant that breaks through the cement and say, I will create a flower. I will bring life back. And the young people must learn this.
What would be, so two last questions, I think, and then I will let you to your night. So what would be your message to the political leaders in Luxembourg and Europe, and second to the people like us who invest their life in change for better?
Well, from what I remember, Luxembourg is a tax-free haven, isn't it? It is, no? So I think Luxembourg should use the amazing money that has been generated to show another path where money is a facilitator and not a grabber. The disease we have is, you know, everything living, as I said, gives and receives. And I have become convinced that food is the main currency and water is the main currency of life. That's my ecological learning. But money is the only thing that, you know, was removed from the flow of life. And first it was money which measured resources. Then it became capital which exploits resources. And now it's fictitious money and digital money and cryptocurrencies that have nothing to do with reality, except when you want to buy other people's land. Then it becomes real. You know, they're not grounded in reflection of the value when it grows, but it is grounded in grabbing the real resources. We are going through, I think one of the things while you're in Luxembourg, don't think that the enclosures of the commons is over. New enclosures of the commons is happening right now. And money is a big driver. So just remember, Gates has become the richest landlord. And in the future, they want to forget currency. In my country, they had digitalization and they got rid of cash. And poor people lost 90% of their income. But over time, they want to get rid of all currency and just have this artificial intelligence generated cryptocurrencies to give us value. So I do believe that Luxembourg will lose badly. When that old money system goes, it should be active in looking at where's the world going. It should put the money to facilitate the transition, not as another financialization of nature, which is what the World Economic Forum is doing. You know, they want to make more money out of nature now, but more in service of nature, more in service of society, taking instruction from society and civil society to say, where should the money go? What is needed to be done? And from Luxembourg itself, for Luxembourg as a country, you know, you are you have a privilege because you're small. And my life has taught me small is more adaptive. Small is more resilient. The dinosaurs went extinct. The little guy survived. So smallness creates flexibility. And that smallness of your country can be a big experiment of a transition to live in this world, as one planet.
And one last message is to people like us who are investing their life in change for a better.
Well, all I can say is thank you for doing that and making that choice, because each of you had another choice. Each of you could have run to the financial world and helped the billionaires make more money through speculation and gambling on the global casino. Or each of you could have worked for agribusiness. Each of you have made a choice. And I can tell you through my own life's experience that you're happier human beings than your friends who chased money and fatter salaries. You're happier because you did what your conscience told you to do. And there is no happier place to be than to live in harmony with the guidance of your conscience and the energy of your passions. So all my strength and all my love to you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we will end it here. I thank you. Really.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And then thank you, Nori and Marine also, and thank you all of you. Thank you to Jessica and Anne-Françoise who did the translation. It was hard, I think. And yes, thank you to all of you. Bye-bye. Have a nice Saturday.